Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to episode 98 of Pillar Talk. We got Mr. Bad Guy Locke in the building from Say Hello to the Bad Guy podcast. What's up, brother?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on. I'm real excited to be here, man.
Dude, I'm really excited to talk to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Um, well, I'm a fat crook from Lincoln Park, and I started a podcast. That's about it. No, actually, yeah. So I'm from Lincoln Park, born and raised. I know some of your listeners probably aren't from the area. That's the southern suburbs of Detroit. And basically, I'm just this guy that and it kind of reflects on the show. I've always been a guy that's had like this diverse set of interests, which led me to hanging out with an eclectic group of friends. Because like when I was an athlete growing up, so I played football and wrestled, so I hung out with some of the jocks. But then I was in the drama club, so I hung out with those kids. But a lot of my buddies from the neighborhood, those were the kids that kind of were the troublemakers and that eventually turned into gang members, so I had those guys as friends too. But i I myself was more of a, I like to read books and watch Star Wars and read comic books and stuff like
Right.
that, so it just kind of led to me my whole life just kind of having this diverse set of interests, but then meeting all these different friends, so having all these close relationships with people that are of all different interests. And that's kind of, when I got into starting the podcast eventually, that's one of the reasons I have all these very different people that are on with me, because it's kind of my, like I said, my eclectic group of friends that I collected over my lifetime.
Yeah. And then so your fascination with criminals came from just you knew a lot of them and you just it was part of your life because you never wanted to be a part of a like you never wanted to do it. Like you said, you were at home reading, like you always just knew about it.
So there's a couple things. For one, when I was a kid, I grew up next to, my next door neighbor was a mobster. And when I was a kid, you hear stuff around the neighborhood, but I just thought he was this really cool guy. He was giant, like a 400-pound man, but he was always super cool. And these small downriver houses and small yards and stuff. So when I was out, doing yard work, I would just kind of cut his grass because it was quick and easy. And
Right.
then, he'd pull out this giant knot of cash and throw me a 20. And that, it's in the 80s where, that's a $5 lawn cutting job. And as I got older and I started to realize what a mobster was, um, I kind of made this connection like, oh, now I get it. But I also had this realization that he was a very different person than what you think of mobsters. I knew him as this nice guy. Like if I
Right.
was doing a fundraiser, I would knock on the door and ask if he wanted to buy something, and he'd peel me off a couple bucks and be like, "Ah, just buy yourself something out of there." And then the same thing. My dad used to hang out with some bikers, and bikers are known as these scary guys, and they were all bearded and tattooed, but they were always, they go outside and play catch with me and be like, "Hey, what's up, kid?" So it was something that I was around a lot. And you can't grow up in the Detroit area without developing some kind of comfort level with that kind of lifestyle. And as I got older, it just seemed really, really interesting. But what really piqued my interest in it was, I've always been a history buff. So actually, when I went to college, I originally wanted to be a history professor. So that's what I was going to school for. And when you start reading history, you can't get far into history without realizing how much effect all these different criminals and criminal lifestyles and criminal situations affect history as a whole. And so I think it's a combination of, the people I grew up around, that kind of thing. And then just being a history fanatic in general is kind of what turned me on to the criminal history, basically.
So you just liked delving into the history of everything. And then so you essentially like seen a criminal. Everybody says he's a criminal, but your aspect of him was he was a really great guy. Like he actually was a big part of your childhood. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
no, and everybody like has a story. Everybody has a story. I was into some of your podcast, and some of them are just like that's just a normal guy, but he was just a, a bloody criminal just in every way he could.
Yeah, it's definitely a thing that you see. So nobody ever wants to be the bad guy, right? Everybody's, just kind of living their life how they feel it's right or whatever they think the situation is. And honestly, we deal a lot of times with um, you know, uh sociopaths and psychopaths and that kind of thing. So, it's a mental disorder, but yeah, it's definitely something where I realized there's, two sides to every story. And what we hear is, the bloody stuff, the crazy stuff. And it was really interesting to dig deeper and kind of find out, the person behind these situation and sometimes what developed created these situations. We've covered a whole lot of guys that were pretty normal guys, had a pretty normal life. Some of them were even upstanding guys. They go to World War One, which is a notorious, bloody, and terrible war. People seen a lot of terrible stuff. They come back with what we called at the time, we called it shell shock. Now we know it to be PTSD.
Okay.
And then now all of a sudden they're running the streets and they're, getting in gunfights and stuff like that. Well, how much of that has to do with they became accustomed to living this violent lifestyle and they've seen a lot of stuff, so they're just a different person now.
Right. And then now they delve into a whole different lifestyle because of what the shit that they've seen. And
Exactly.
nobody knew what it was, shell shock. So everybody was like, "Oh, they're just a little bit rattled up from being in the war and trying to get blown up and killed and shit."
Yeah. You're home now. Suck it up and get back to work and be a
But
productive member of society.
the criminals that uh, that you do, I don't feel like they're not that crazy. I mean, it's just I don't know, they're smart. They're smart and they know how to like plan stuff correctly and stuff like that. So it's like it's not even like they're like because like more of the sociopathic and the crazy like the crazy mental problems, right?
Hmm.
Those are like the serial killers, and you guys don't cover no serial killers because it gets gross. And
Right.
yeah, and the criminals, they lead a lot cleaner life. It seems like they're just it's just like, dude, this dude sitting right next to me could be a mastermind criminal.
Well, we try to cover a little bit of a mix of all of them, and there is a lot of guys like that that are just super slick. But for the record, a lot of sociopaths are super slick. Because so just the fact that you're willing to live this lifestyle that's outside of the norm that you know is a criminal lifestyle lead you a lot of times towards being a sociopath. But a lot of these guys are actually able to fake it or compartmentalize, where they go home and they're this good family man, and then they go back to work and they're popping somebody's eye out in a vice,
Right.
and it's different versions. And and one thing I always say is we don't cover serial killers, and that's mostly because of the nature of our show where we're joking around and we're being silly. That's not funny when you're talking about serial killers. They kill a lot of women or
Yeah.
sex workers or, sometimes children and stuff. And that's, not something that I want to take too lightly. But we have covered a handful of guys. For an example, Tommy Karate, who was a banana hitman, who probably would have been a serial killer if he hadn't end up becoming a made man and he
Okay.
was able to steer those tendencies towards people that weren't non-combatants, if you will. So it's other made men and drug dealers and that kind of thing. But when you look at some of the stuff he was into, if it had went a different way, he may have been a serial killer.
You may
And
have
and
just
that's something we try and do a lot is we try and cover a mix. So we cover some guys that are just really smart and legitimately would have been running Fortune 500 companies if they had chose a different line of work. There's also some people that may have been serial killers if they weren't able to hook up with either a mafia family or the Hells Angels.
yeah, because dude, they have people for that job in those mob families. They have those. I mean, technically, those guys that were the enforcers and the ones that would go out and dude did me wrong. I'm gonna kill him. Those guys were serial killers, but they were hired. That's it. They were just
Mhm.
made men. Is the only thing that makes them different. Because like
Exactly.
they were leading the whole completely lives with wife and kids and everything. So
Yeah, and that happens a lot, and we see a lot of that. But that's also what is able to make some of these guys that you're talking about, where oh, he seems like a good dude. He doesn't seem that bad. He has a regular life. He's just kind of running it like a business, which is kind of true. But every once in a while, something needs to get done. And just because he's not dirty in his hands himself, the guy that calls the shot is somewhat as implicated as the guy that actually pulls the trigger. So even though he doesn't do it, they're the ones that are steering him towards killing people.
Yeah, because the person is not going to pull the trigger unless he's got some money behind it. Somebody's got to give, you give somebody something. You're a consumer. You got to
Mhm.
you got to pay for this, so so you would just be a crime boss because you would be connected to that murder, like technically. I mean,
Right. Well, and a lot of crime bosses, as early as possible, try to distance themselves from that kind of work because that's the kind of stuff that gets you a lot of trouble. That's the kind of stuff that gets you caught up. And they farm that out to either the young guys that are trying to come up and make their bones, or your resident psychopath that is just looking for an excuse to go out and put a couple bullets in someone and chop up their body.
so they don't make them made men, so they're not any part of the family.
It depends. You always need a couple in-house guys, but for example, Al Capone was real big on farming out that kind of work so that he had a little bit of distance in between himself and the people that were doing the work for him.
But there's still a there's still a paper trail for that where one of his guys pays for that.
Right. Well, and they usually try and do all that cash. I actually did cover a guy that literally got caught by a paper trail when one of his underlings gave a guy a receipt for a bribe.
No
So
way.
yeah, that was a guy named Gaston Means. He was a con man, and one of his underlings, yeah, was giving out people receipts for criminal work and shit. Um, not the smartest of guys, but it happens. But a lot of times, if you're in a cash operation, and that's actually why the government came up with the Rico Act, because it got to a point where once you reached a certain level in the mob, you were untouchable. Because even though you were calling all the shots and running this whole thing, you talk to your capo who goes on down and talks to his crew, and then he, calls an outsider, and it all gets done. And it made it impossible for the government to bust any of these guys. They just really couldn't do it. So when they come up with the RICO Act, which is racketeering, corruption, I don't remember exactly what it stands for, but it basically just says that's where they started busting all these mob bosses because they basically said if we can prove that it's a conspiracy, if you guys are all in one organization, the guy at the top is just as responsible for the guys that committed it, and everybody's guilty together because it's a conspiracy.
So everybody gets the same charge?
Well, they would all get kind of all the charges. So yeah, you get all kinds of racketeering charges. So
So
when
I
you look at a lot of these trials, like when John Gotti, for example, went to trial when Sammy the Bull turned on him, he was there with a whole bunch of guys, and they were all charged with, extortion, these murders, and then you bring in your high-powered lawyers that try and separate their client from the other clients for certain, separate trials and stuff like
right.
that. But yes, in the RICO Act, which was basically designed just to bust mobsters that are distance themselves from crime, everybody can get all charged with the same crime because it's a criminal conspiracy and they're all involved. So all they have to do is prove two things: that the crime happened and that you're all part of organization together.
Right. So because I don't know, I just heard when if somebody was gonna get RICO, they're not gonna see the light of day no more. Is that
Tip
because they have a plethora of charges?
Right. Well, and the charges are so steep, and it's geared towards putting these guys away forever. So
Okay.
yeah, when somebody gets RICO'd, you're going to get hit with every single crime that they can prove that anybody committed. So when guys get caught on RICO charges, they're getting busted with 10, 20, 50 charges. And they'll usually do them, they don't run them consecutively. They'll do them, one after another.
Yeah, 2 years for this, 4 years for that.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hey, I know you murdered many people, but we're going to put you away for taxes.
Yeah. Um, so so Rico, racketeering is making money without paying taxes?
Racketeering is any criminal enterprise, basically. So every individual thing you call, they would call it a racket, if you will. So extortion is a racket. Prohibition was a racket. The numbers game is a racket.
Gambling.
Prostitution. Yeah. So every different thing is a racket. So anything you do that's illegal that you're making money off of is racketeering.
Oh, and then okay,
It's
so
it's it's basically
Sports betting until this year.
exactly. Well, there's a lot of that. Things that were at one point rackets and were at one point crimes have now become just normal.
just normal shit. Yeah. Yeah, so pay your taxes or you're gonna get RICO'd. We don't care. We don't care if you sell drugs. Just pay taxes on it, dude. That's all.
Well,
That's all we're trying to do. We're trying to legalize them. Just wait on us, bro.
well, so we always say on our show, if you're affiliated, and it doesn't really matter whether it's the mob or a biker gang or whatever, everybody has to kick up. So whatever your crime is, if you're selling drugs or whatever you're doing, you make your money, and in order to operate as part of this family, or even if you're not in the family but you're just operating their territory, you have to kick some of that money up,
Right.
right? Well, the biggest baddest gang out there is always the American government, and the rules still apply. Even the mob bosses have to kick up. They just got to kick up to the government. So they're like,
Yeah.
look, we'll play cat and mouse and see if we can catch you on the actual crimes. But in the meantime, we still want to get paid off of it.
Yeah. We still want to get paid, so we're gonna get you. Yeah, and basically, the government runs the same way as a gang does. It's the biggest gang in the world.
Very much so. I mean, they have their enforcers, they have their prosecutors. It's all just like the mafia, just bigger and badder with more money.
And by the law.
Right. And we see that the law is fluid, right? So at one point the numbers racket was illegal until they adopted it, and now it became the state lottery. Now it's not illegal, right? It's the lottery. It was the exact same thing. They were playing a 3-number numbers racket, which was
Even
was
now
the
here
name
in
of the lottery.
Michigan, you're not even allowed to have raffles unless you're a nonprofit.
Mm-hmm.
What?
Yeah, it's illegal. Even I just had this conversation today. Even if you're asking for them to like and share in order to enter this giveaway, that's still considered a raffle, and the like and share is considered currency.
Oh, no way.
Yes.
Damn NFTs, bro. Damn NFTs, dude.
It's another one of these schemes that I wasn't smart enough to get on the early side, the NFTs.
Right.
Oh, we're still early, man. You can still get into that boy and get rich. Duke says, what's in the glass lock?
Yeah.
Well, to be honest, I was a little nervous. I don't do a lot of interviews, so I just went with it's one of my consistent classics, Two Hearted Bells.
My buddy's favorite beer.
Oh.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite. I usually don't drink it as much during the winter. It's more of a summer beer. But I recently, over the summer, we went out to the Bell's brew house. So the actual brewery's in Comstock, but they have a brewery/brew house in Kalamazoo, and we went out there, and that shit was so good that Bell's is kind of coming close to beating Founders as my top craft beer.
And I see that like your show has a bar vibe. He's like, we're just a couple guys drinking and smoking and just talking. Like, by no means this is a history podcast. We just like talking about history and talking about shit. And it's got a real bar vibe to it. Like I'm sitting at a bar like that. You could have like a little bar stool, couple bar stools, and make that podcast like funny as fuck because that's what it looks like.
T-Rope's been, when he's explaining it to you guys, to everybody else today, he's, even though it says you're not, he's like, it's just like what is it, the files, what were you saying?
No, it's not. I said it's not like that. Not like the crime files or whatever you guys say. It's not true crimes. That's what you say. It's not no true crime shit.
The reason I say it's not true crime, which technically I guess it would be true crime because it is true and we are talking about crime, but most people when they think of the true crime genre, which is huge in podcasts, they're looking for serial killers, and they
Right.
want they want those same serial killer guys and Ted Bundy and all that stuff. And like I said, I'm just not that into it. I mean, maybe someday we could get there to try and to cover one, but I'm more into the gangster stuff because, like I mentioned earlier, I use the term non-combatants, and that's something we use a lot because at least these gangsters they're killing each other and other gangsters, which
But not
not
just
saying
killing
it's good by
innocent
any
people. Yeah.
means, but that's a lot different than picking up a sex worker who are usually, people that are struggling or underprivileged people also, and then killing them. Like that's
Right.
not something that I want to talk about as much. But when I say it's not a history podcast, the reason I say that is um the history is accurate. I do a lot of research and I typically do that sober or at least, sober-ish,
Mhm.
in the sober territory.
Right.
Um but but the but it's real. The research is good. Um
Yeah, you say you check sources and everything. You make sure you're not talking bullshit.
and sometimes even if I find something that I can't multi-source but I think is interesting, I'll still throw it out there, but with the asterisk that hey, I don't know how true this is, but
Yep.
I just like to, tell as much of the story as possible. But the reason I wanted to be a history teacher, what got me into teacher, I had my 6th grade teacher, Miss Patino. And prior to that, I didn't like history. And a lot of people don't like history. They think it's a boring subject
Yep.
because you just get some guy and he's just babbling about, he's just shooting names and dates at you and it gets real boring.
Yep.
And then Miss Patino was the first teacher that would kind of explain it like, okay, so imagine you're this and this is how it happened. And she made it personal to where I could understand it. And I'm like, oh, this is crazy. These are real people. These are real situations. And then, especially when you start to see history repeats itself, which it always does, it became really interesting. So, the reason I wanted to get into teaching history is because I feel like there's a way to present history that makes it more interesting and palatable. So, when we come up with the premise for this show, in reality, it's what I've been doing. Like, so all these guys that are on the show, they're all my friends, they're my family, they're my buddies. I've known all these people for 10, 20, 30 years. And we've been doing this exact thing this whole time. So they're all typically pretty funny, interesting. And I'm kind of this dork that just reads a lot.
Yeah.
So, whether, when we were young and we were working at restaurants or, some of these guys, we were doing cable. So we were stuck in a van together 8 hours a day. And I would just always be babbling about whatever I just read or whatever I just heard. And, we just kind of kick it back and forth and joke about it. So when I was trying to come up with a premise of what do I want to do for a show? Like what do I think would be a good podcast? We were looking at doing stuff like a movie review podcast or all these ideas that are there's a lot of them out there. Nothing against that. I listen to stuff like that, but that it didn't interest me. And then I put a lot of work into the podcast. So it's kind of hard to put that much work into something that you're not interested in. So when I came up with this idea, I was really excited about it because I'm like, look, this is really what we're doing anyways. And to me, I just kind of wanted to be able to showcase like my buddies that I think are fucking hilarious, and kind of expose that to the world to hear, these funny different personalities, but at the same time, we're putting out some information.
Yep.
And some people like it, some people don't. But I think if you're not into it, there's plenty of podcasts and documentaries that are straightforward and just real lecture based. But
Yep.
some people don't learn well that way. So I wanted to put something out that where people can get good information, but in a format that's more palatable.
Make it fun and just be like, and you're read up on the subject, so you're not spitting bullshit. So you're actually getting real facts like, holy shit, that really did happen. These guys are just sitting, because now you can bounce it off your friends and they're like, the fuck? What did we do what? And then you can get their real reaction from it. Do you try to get them on and not tell them about the guest, or you try to get them to research not the guest,
The
the person
topic.
you're highlighting? Yeah.
Yeah. So the people coming on have no idea. So I purposely they come into it blank, no knowledge at all. So at the beginning of the podcast, we start off talking about our drinks because we're all just drinking and hanging
Yeah.
out and stuff. And they don't know anything. So they don't find out who we're covering until I say the bad guy we're covering today is. And
Okay.
then I hit them with the name and we'll go from there. And now we've gotten to a point where we've been doing it long enough. And I have like a rotating group of it's the same guys, but it's a handful that I kind of switch in and out of. And what I do is I kind of know now who knows what or who might have information about certain things. And the analogy I use is it's not a football team where I'm the coach. It's like a baseball team and I'm the manager. So I try and think this is the guy I want to cover. Who would think this was interesting? Who, there might be somebody that knows all about it, and I don't necessarily want to put them on. Not because it still wouldn't be a good time, but it's not the concept isn't us just spitting facts back and forth at each other. So my guest hosts kind of represent like you or the listener that's kind of hearing the story for the first time. And that's kind of what they're thinking is, wow, that's fucking crazy. Or, oh, why would he do that? So the reactions you get from them are genuine because they're hearing it for the first
Yep.
time.
So basically, what it is you're literally sitting in front of a live audience but you put mics in front of their face
Hmm.
and you're telling them this is what I researched. Let's talk about all these points. And
Hmm.
that's pretty cool because they're essentially the viewer too, but they can comment with their mouth. you know
Exactly. And some of the feedback I get all the time is that um a lot of the stuff that the guest hosts are saying or the questions they have or the jokes they're making are the same thing that the listeners were thinking. They just get to be the mouthpiece for that.
right.
And it's what you were talking about, like the internet has killed a lot of bar arguments, but I still had a time frame where I could enjoy that. So I like to go up to the bar and then you argue about, who had more home runs or who was the better
Yeah,
player, this and that. And you didn't have Google to check it automatically. So that's definitely the kind of vibe that we're going for is yeah, just a bar discussion.
yeah,
It's the same thing we do if we hang out and we're drinking over at my house or we're playing cards. We just end up bullshitting and joking about stuff.
yeah, but now you're just putting a mic in front of your face. Just talk. Just the same thing we're doing. And that brings more that's what Light It Up is like. It's just we're just chilling. We're just having a good time. And it's the best. That's the best stuff because if you were going for the bar vibe, that's the exact vibe you're giving off. It's just like, is your wife a bartender too?
Yes, she is. Well, she's not a bartender anymore, but she was for a long time, and she worked at a lot of high-end places, so she can make really good drinks. So,
Yeah,
like White Russians, old fashions, like she kills it. And I take full advantage of that as much as possible. So, yeah, she'll run us out some drinks, and because we like to do the craft beers, but situationally, I like to try and introduce other drinks and stuff.
right,
And some of the drinks we do, I did a podcast on this guy. He was a French guy, and I was just looking for something that was a drink that was French, a cocktail, besides like champagne or whatever. And I found this drink called the French Connection, and it's only two ingredients, amaretto and cognac. But there's something in the two flavors when you mix them together. They're great. And now it's one of my go-to drinks. So we've actually had a lot of both the guest hosts and our listeners. They hear some of the drinks we make and then they go try them, or they go to a local bar and order one. And now it's one of their go-to drinks.
right.
So, and we got, 70 some episodes. So at some point you got to start mixing in, some new drinks and stuff like that. And I got this in-house resource, I got this elite level high-end bartender. I feel like for what we do, it'd be silly not to utilize that resource.
Well, you guys really explain the drinks too, but you got to explain this one drink to me. I remember you had a podcast about a good mob. They were tough mother truckers, right? And you were drinking chocolate daiquiris or something. You were like, we're gonna talk about criminals, but we're gonna drink these chocolate daiquiris.
So it's funny that you would ask because I think my explanation of that it's very similar to you. So you're a giant dude. You got
Yeah.
tattoos all over your face, right?
Oh yeah.
But you like to have fun and you're kind of a silly goose. So probably a lot of people don't expect that,
Yeah,
right?
definitely. That's true.
So a lot of my friends are like that. So, we get together and we're doing this podcast, a lot of these guys, I got mechanics and truck drivers and, some of these guys are from the West Side, they're from Southwest Detroit. And my wife's signature drink is a chocolate martini. And for the record, if you drink it, it is amazing. You can't taste any liquor, but it's all liquor. So it fucks you up, but it's amazing. And I kind of really like the irony of drinking that. So we like to roll it out because I think there's nothing funnier than watching a big burly mechanic and a Mexican dude from Southwest sip on chocolate martinis out of a martini glass while we talk about gangsters. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I kind of appreciate the irony in that.
And the even funnier part is you ask them about how their drink is, and they explain it like the chocolate's so good, like it's really good drink, So that's the funny part too. The one guy, what did he say? He said the salt on the rim, man. It was, talking about it was something with tequila in it, I think it was, and he was like the salt on the rim, and the limes were smashed up in it. It was so delicious, like.
But yeah, like I said, that's not a coincidence. I know what I'm doing, and to me, that's like my own fun game that I like to play is how how effeminate of a drink can I get these big burly motherfuckers to drink while we talk about wild crazy alpha males,
Those are the drinks that I like.
Yeah, the
Don't give me the strong ones. Give me the girly ones.
I'm not a drinker because that stuff is ucky. Okay, like for real, dude. I'm a big old man, 300 and probably like 70 pounds now, and 6'5", and I go in there and I say, hey man, will you give me a shot of 8 Mile vodka, but put it in a big glass and then put a lot of lemonade with it, because I like the taste of lemonade more than the vodka. And if I'm going out and I have to go out, like sometimes with my wife, because apparently she's a man and I'm not, and she gets her stuff. And one time she got an apple beer, so I was like, I guess I'll get that too. And it was delicious, but I don't drink beer.
That's the whole you don't pop Molly, but your girl will.
Yeah, that's straight up. I don't drink beer, but my bitch will.
But yeah, so knowing that that's kind of your guys' kind of drink. Sometimes we get together in person. I'll have my wife whip a couple up, and I know you're not big drinkers, but you could try out one, and I'm telling you, they'll go down smooth. I would have to cut you guys off at one because you guys would sit there and drink them like yoo-hoos, and they would have to Uber you all the way back to Monroe and shit.
Yeah, that is true. That is very true, because that good stuff, like, oh my God, this really does taste like a Starburst. I'm gonna slug that stuff and get a tummy ache. I'm gonna black out, and I might not be where I started in the beginning, And I learned some crazy information today.
Okay.
My buddy Ryan Mahoney, his wife, come up to me and she said, "Oh, ain't you guys interviewing Keithy's uncle today?" I'm like, "What? No, I'm interviewing this dude that does Say Hello to the Bad Guy podcast." And she's like, "Yeah, Keithy's uncle." And I'm like, "Well, Then Ryan shows up. I'm like, "So, what's your wife talking this crazy stuff? You know the guy that we're interviewing today?" He's like, "Dude, I grew up with the kid. I knew him forever, dude." And I'm like, how do I know him? Like, dude, we've been talking to him on a podcast.
Well,
like,
the reason I know of him is Sharon. Sharon is who put me onto you.
Okay. So Sharon is my sister-in-law. So she's family. So yes, I am Keithy's uncle. And Ryan, and I like what he's doing too. The taste of is great. But yeah, so I've known him since he's a little bit younger than me. Now we're at an age where the age difference is kind of negligible.
Yeah.
But when we were younger, he was kind of one of the little homies and shit.
That's dope, dude. Because he's actually a big part of Brain Jerk.
Yeah, well, and that's actually how I originally got turned on to you guys, was also by Sharon, where she told me about it, and then she told me that he was involved. So then I started checking out his stuff, and then I caught up to the Light 'Em Up, and that's actually perfect timing because that's when I'm at work and I'm kind of settled in and I'm kind of doing my admin stuff. So I fire that up, and it gives me something. I mean, for one, I let you guys always have a positive vibe, so that helps, when you're at work. And even if you like your job, even if you're a happy guy, at some point you're like, another day at work. So
A little bit of extra motivation never hurts.
exactly. But yeah, so Sharon, Ryan, like they're all family or friends of the family. Honestly, like Ryan, that's kind of almost more like family than it is a friend
Yeah.
of the family. Like I've literally known him his whole life, basically.
And that's what I was gonna say. I was like, dude, we're family, bro. We're connected. Dude, that's crazy. And I just learned it today, and I was like, I have all this stuff to talk about, and this is the only thing I want to talk about.
It's a small world, man.
Right. That's cool. And then happy birthday, Sharon, by the way.
Happy birthday, Sharon.
Yeah.
And
Happy birthday, Sharon.
Says that's my sister.
But also, my wife's cousin, so Dan the Duke, he's on our show all the time.
Yep.
I believe he hung out with you guys. He went to like the Gathering of the Juggalo or some shit like that with you, I think.
He sure did. Duke's pretty fucking cool. He's a cool dude.
When did he go?
2 years ago.
2 years ago. I wasn't there. So I didn't meet him. That's what Josh was like. You don't know Duke this morning? I was like, who's Duke? The Duke Blue Devils? What do you mean, dude?
Duke John Wayne?
Yeah, what's going on?
We were trying to figure out a nickname to give him because everybody's got their own little gathering nickname, and he pulls up his shirt and he's got the Duke tattooed on his. Well, there it is. You got one already.
It's etched in stone.
Yep.
Right.
He said, "Whoop whoop."
That's what. Well, and he'll be super excited. We called him lifting up his shirt stone because he's far from statuesque. So that'd be like his compliment of the day.
It's kind of like me, far from statuesque. little
built out of cotton.
Yeah. I can fall real easily. It's a real nice fall. How many bad guys is there in history?
So that's the crazy part. Going into it originally, I thought, that this had like a ceiling, like how far can we go? But honestly, the deeper we go into it, the more that I find. So it's almost infinite because every story I cover unlocks more people. So at one point we actually used to do a segment where who in this story would you want us to cover next? And we get that a lot. So for example, I wanted to try and cover like an Asian gangster. I was looking for like a Chinatown guy or some shit like that. And I found so many that I actually ended up doing a Chinatown series because I couldn't pick just one, so I ended up covering 4 people that were like Chinatown gangsters.
Okay.
And that happens a lot. And I think the secret is the guys that we're covering, I pick interesting stories. I'm not picking just the biggest names. And, and we don't just cover, mobsters and organized crime. So we cover bikers, street gangsters, Wild West outlaws, a couple pirates, con men, crooked cops. We cover a little bit of everything. So that opens up the field. But a lot of people that do what we do, they cover Al Capone, Lucky Luciano, John Gotti, you know what I mean? They start doing that. And then you get to like 20, 25 guys and you ran out. You covered all the big guys. So we covered in our first season, I believe we had 35 episodes. And then as a season finale, we covered Al Capone, which turned into a 4-part series.
Okay.
So that's kind of the model we're going with now is we're going to cover a bunch of these different guys, people that, guys that people haven't heard of, that kind of thing. And then we'll give them some big names at the end of the season. And what I try to do is I try to tie into them. So the reason in season 1 we went with Al Capone is because we covered so many of these guys that were
under him.
Yeah, the guys that came up under him, the guys, his right-hand man, the guy that followed him up, the guy that started the gang before him, to where in reality, our Al Capone was a 4-part series. It's probably like a 12-part series because of all the other guys that we covered. And then, so I was like, okay, this is the obvious one. Al Capone's been in and around all these guys' stories. Let's wrap it up with him. And that's kind of what we're going to do moving forward. So eventually we'll get to, a Lucky Luciano, Billy the Kid, and some of these big names. But that's not that's not all we're doing. And the fans are kind of why we do it, because at some point a lot of the fans start thinking, well, now we're a fan of your show. We want to hear your take on Al Capone. So when I first got into it, I thought, why would I be the 120th guy to tell the Al Capone story when I could be the first guy to talk about Fred Killer Burke? I'd just rather do that, you know? But then you get a fan base, and at some point, these people are like, yeah, but we really like your show. We want to hear you
We want
guys
your
cover Al
take.
Capone.
We want your take on it. Yeah.
Right. And we don't have a show without our listeners and without our fan base. So I think that's so we'll do that, but we're trying to slowly ease them in. But when you say like how many bad guys are there to cover, not only is there more bad guys, the longer I'm doing this, I'm finding whole different types of crime that I didn't realize. So I originally thought, yeah, crimes are mobsters, bikers, and cowboys, and those are your criminals, and that's it. And then, yeah, I've just found so many different things that you don't think of. You got war criminals, you got corrupt politicians. We got one in the can. It's going to be coming out in a little bit. We got a gigolo that
No way.
is, yeah, a real big time guy who's running around in Hollywood in the 40s, and he was hooking up with all these famous actresses. And what he'd do is he'd hook up with them and then pretty much blackmail them. He'd either have pictures of them or just learn their ins and outs and their secrets, and then he would blackmail them, and then he would kick his piece up to the LA mob, and you know that was his thing. One of his nicknames was Oscar, because they said his dick was as big as the statue.
Holy moly.
Yeah.
Oh.
One of the cool things I think about like the gangsters and where you could go is that you don't necessarily have to do American gangsters. There's gangsters all over the world. There's crime all over the world. And to be honest, some of these guys over in Russia might be a little bit bigger. Might be, and none of us know any of them,
Or we have no idea who it is, and they might do like worse than some of our most famous criminals. You accidentally delve into freaking
the Irish mob
Yeah.
and Peaky Blinders bullshit.
So we've dipped into a little bit of that. I try and make sure I try to have diversity in who we cover, and we mix in a bunch of different dudes. And we have covered a Russian guy. His name's Alexander Solonik. His nickname is Super Killer. So I would definitely recommend checking him out. He is the guy that kind of changed our thought process of what a hitman is. Up until him, and this is one of these things that happens culturally, but we don't know it because most people haven't heard of him. But up until that, our thought of a hitman was always like the Bugsy Siegel, the kind of, the fedora with an overcoat, maybe a fucking a guitar case with a Tommy gun, that kind of thing is what we thought of a hitman. And then he was kind of one of the pioneers that led us towards thinking of, the Hitman 47, of the slick guy that could, the game Hitman, the guy that wears the suits and,
yeah.
they get people from behind with a garrote, or they'll snipe people and stuff like that. So there is that. Ireland we kind of stay away from because they don't like it when you joke about the troubles, so we don't touch too much stuff from Ireland. But yeah, we've covered not a bunch, but some different stuff from different countries. We actually had a guy, and this is why I say I like to cover interesting stories, not just the biggest name mobsters. We covered a guy that was the first known usage of a car as a getaway vehicle, and he was a French anarchist.
And he used a car after he did some robbing a bank or something, and he used a car to drive away.
Yep, and he was one of the first guys to do it. It was so odd at the time. For one, because they were using like Duesenbergs and stuff like that, like these big expensive cars. So you had to be super fucking rich to even have access to a car. They were hard to get to, and he was the first one to do it. He got chased out of town. They robbed the bank. They take off in a car.
They were chasing him on foot, weren't they?
No, one cop was on a horse. The other one was on a bike.
Oh my gosh, he had that level up.
And after that, that it opened up for the whole world. Everybody's like, "Oh shit,
All I
that's a
need
good
is a
idea.
car. All I
We're
need
going
is
to
a car.
cars."
So, is that the reason why they made that law, the fleeing and evading law, you think?
I'm not sure because that was over in France.
Okay.
So, their laws are kind of crazy, but a lot of a lot of the laws we know now became federal crimes. It's what made the FBI now because early in Prohibition, so through Prohibition, and then in the 1930s, where you had like the Depression era gangsters, like the bank robbers, which are like your Bonnie and Clyde and John Dillinger and stuff like that. Um, they couldn't catch them because the way the laws were all set up, it was state to state and county to county. And if you can get in your car and haul ass across the state line, the cops were just kind of screwed. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like there was nothing they could do. So I'm drawing a blank on the name of it right now, but like one of the first federal laws was it made it illegal to cross state lines in a stolen car. That made it a federal crime. Another big one was the Mann Act, and the actual verbiage is that it's illegal to cross state lines with a female for immoral purposes. So originally the law was made to prevent like, white slavery because back then people could just take females and just steal them and take them out of town and sell them into prostitution and stuff like that.
Okay.
But what they started doing was they started using it for reasons like, for example, Machine Gun Jack McGurn. They couldn't catch him on anything, but they found out he was cheating on his wife with this girl, and they went out and they went down to Florida to see Capone and did a couple different things. So they're like, well, he's married and that's not his wife, and that's immoral. So he's violating the Mann Act.
What?
So they tried to catch him. This is a true story. His girl's name was the blonde alibi, Luis Rolfe. They tried to bust him as an accomplice in the St. Valentine's Day massacre, and they couldn't come up with any proof. They couldn't come up with any evidence. They couldn't come up with anything. What they were able to prove was he was cheating on his wife with a girl he left the state with. So they're like, well,
That was
fuck it.
bad intentions?
Yeah.
So
Well, it was immoral. He's married, and that's not his wife.
we
And
can't get
the
him for
wording
what?
is immoral purposes.
We can't get him for anything but this. We
Mhm.
have to get him off the streets.
And
And that is why the law came out?
Yep. And for the record, that one, they fought that all the way to the Supreme Court. So there is a legal precedent in the Supreme Court, which is Girardi versus the United States, that stems all the way back from that crime that they tried to charge him with based on the St. Valentine's Day massacre, since they couldn't find anything on that.
Did that crime get taken?
No,
Or taken down?
nobody was ever convicted of the St. Valentine's Day massacre. Now, they did find the two guns that were used. There were two Tommy guns. They were found in Michigan, and they were in the possession of Fred Killer Burke. And they're still on display now at the Michigan State Police Office in Behringer, Michigan. But technically, nobody's ever been convicted of the St. Valentine's Day massacre. 7 people were killed. No one was ever charged or convicted.
So what happened on that? They just like a crowded room got shot up or something?
I'll give you the short version. We covered a whole episode on just the St. Valentine's Day massacre, so you could check it out. But basically, Capone was sick of the North Side's bullshit, and he used the Detroit Purple Gang to set them up and get them all in a room. Now, the boss, George Moran, was supposed to be there, but he was running late. But one of his guys that was kind of short and fat and looked like him showed up, and the lookouts said, yeah, he's in there. And they came in dressed as cops. So 2 guys came in as cops, got all their attention, lined them up against the wall. And then 2 other guys came in with Tommy guns, mowed all 7 down.
Just like that. So got a big meeting. So they were trying to kill the boss, and they didn't even kill the guy they wanted to kill.
Exactly.
But they killed all of his top men, right?
Yeah, it still crippled the gang. I mean, it was his top hitman, it was his business manager, it was his, you know what I mean? Like they were never the same after that. So
Yeah.
George Moran lived. He still went on to be a criminal, but he was just kind of a small time gang with an, small time guy with a nothing gang after that. But yeah, that was also kind of the crime that wrapped it up for Al Capone because that happened in 29. He ended up getting convicted in 31 because after that happened, that's when it stopped being fun and games. So before that, everybody loved Capone. He was doing quotes in the paper and he's handing out turkeys and running soup kitchens, and everybody's like, ah, fuck it, he's a good guy. You know what I mean? Leave him alone. The government's shady. And then after you murder 7 people during the day, in a bloody fashion, everybody's kind of like, okay, that's a little bit much. And then that's when the government went, both barrels, full blown. We're gonna take this guy out.
And so nobody got charged though for it.
No, nobody got charged for it, but they started relentlessly going after Al Capone. And that's when they decided we're going to get him on something one way or the other. So they were arresting him nonstop. He was getting picked up. If he would go to Florida to relax, he'd get busted in Florida. Like no matter what he would do, they were all over him because basically they were just done playing games. So yeah, they couldn't get him on that. They couldn't get him on any of the big stuff. But they're like, if we just keep nitpicking him, which they never used to do because it was stupid.
Yeah.
But they're like, no, we're getting him off the streets one way or the other. So
Yeah.
even though that crime being convicted of that crime isn't what got him off the streets, convicting that crime is what made them decide that they had to get him one way or the other for something.
So that caused them to end up catching him, or
No,
Ki-
that
kinda.
that caused them to do more efforts to try and catch him a different way.
oh, so you can get him off the streets anyway. So they were just constantly harassing him, right? Just following him, and
Exactly.
Anything they could.
that got him. That got him down.
Yeah, so they ended up finding the tax thing. So they got him on tax evasion. But a lot of people don't know it. He did a year in a Philadelphia state prison or a Pennsylvania state prison a year before that. So in 1930 to 31, he spent a year in prison on a gun charge because he would have never been caught with a gun charge because they wouldn't even thought of that. But they just wanted to get him so bad that they're like, fuck it, we'll put him in prison for a year on a gun charge. We just fucking want him off the street. Before that, they would have never did that because they were trying to build a bigger case. So they were looking for bigger stuff. And after that, they're like, look, anything we can get him on, anytime he steps foot here, whatever he does, we got to find a way to get this guy.
Dude.
And
Duke-
it also
Duke
it
says,
also changed the
government
public
gave him
opinion on him too.
Duke says gave him syphilis. The government gave him syphilis. And then Rosin says, I don't know. He was rich and loved women.
The government gave him syphilis, dude.
Well, it's not out of the realm of what the government has done. What do you?
You're right.
Well, I mean, if there's a conspiracy theory that the government gave Eazy-E AIDS, I mean, maybe that was the trial process. Like, all right, let's see if we can give Capone syphilis. Okay,
Yeah.
that works.
I believe that there's a conspiracy theory for everything.
Well, and I believe the Tuskegee experiments, didn't the government give a whole bunch of black dudes syphilis and then pretend like
Yes.
they were treating it and never do just to see what the long-term effects were?
There was another one where they gave tons of people herpes too and didn't even tell them.
Yeah.
What the?
Yeah, they've released. This is fact. It's not even like conspiracy. This is common knowledge at this point.
They wanted to do a test on these people. So what the hell did they do?
Experimentations on public experimentations. They'd released a couple dudes. They gave them these diseases and they released them to see what would happen.
And then it's up to them with their medical insurance, or if they didn't have it, it's up to them to get their doctor care. It's not the government's.
Government doesn't care. They're just studying.
Yeah.
Well, and I haven't looked into this, so I could be a little bit wrong, but I know the Tuskegee experiment was something to the effect of they gave the guys syphilis, or they took guys that already had syphilis and they fake treated it, but they were actually giving them placebos. So the people were thinking that they were getting syphilis treatments And in reality, they weren't, because they wanted to see what the long-term effects were. So, I
If it
mean,
was
I'm not a
normal-
conspiracy theorist, but when you look at, like cloud seeding in Vietnam and all this different
That's
stuff,
real.
like, I mean, I hate to be that guy, but I
Cloud
also
seeding
don't want to
happens.
take anything off the table, because who
Cloud,
knows?
cloud seeding happens, and that's facts. That
What's
happens
cloud seeding?
every single day all over the world.
What's that?
It's when you put aluminum into the sky and it creates rain. You
So,
can control the weather, manipulate the weather that way.
Yeah, they said they had weather machines.
That's why it rains so much in Vietnam. They made it rain.
yeah, so we're having a hard time in Vietnam, like getting these guys out. We could just like throw big storms at them and just have it rain all over them. But then nowadays, like in Abu Dhabi,
Yep.
in Dubai, where they're super rich and these guys want rain every once in a while, all these rich guys will chip in and they make it rain like once a week in the middle of like the desert over there, where it doesn't typically rain, because they'll
Yep.
just
I
do
was
some
just
cloud
gonna
seed
say
and make
that.
it rain.
Abu Dhabi's in the middle of a desert,
Yeah.
and they fucking make rain.
Yes. They 100% make rain.
Bullshit.
They make clouds that make rain.
Aluminum clouds.
No, the aluminum reacts with what something, and it creates the clouds.
I'm telling
It
you,
make-
look it up. It's called cloud seeding.
Yeah.
And it's a real thing. It
So
makes
I'm
them.
looking it up because I'm gonna come on the show in the morning and I'm gonna shit on both of you. Let's just put some fucking aluminum in the fucking sky. Let me throw a piece of aluminum foil up in the air and see if it starts raining.
I think that's exactly how it works. That's what they do.
Just go outside, dude.
Throw
if
some
I could-
aluminum foil up in the air.
if I
That
let
was the
some
first
aluminum
trial.
foil- if I let some aluminum foil drift into the wind and it starts raining short after, I swear to God, I'll quit Brain Jerk. I will never want to live up to that.
What's up, Gear Changer? Australia's in the house.
Oh yeah, that's actually a good time for him now.
The gear changer, if he's from Australia, we covered an Australian bad guy too. We covered a guy named Chow Hayes, who was he was a Australian gangster, and he was an extortionist. In Australia, they call it a standover guy, because he would literally stand over you until you handed over whatever he wanted.
Oh
What?
shit.
Yeah.
What? I could do that.
No, you can't. You
Give
just
me
have to
some
leg sweep you and you
fucking
fall
money.
down.
Give me some fucking money, please. I'm not gonna say please twice, and then they'll give me money. Just look at them with a stare. My wife can beat me up. I don't even think I got any.
The craziest thing about when we cover guys from different countries, like we cover guys from Australia, and a lot of the terminology is so different than I'm used to. So like in America, like back in the day where we had speakeasies, in Australia they called them sly grogs. And
Sly grog.
What's a speakeasy?
A speakeasy is like a bar that's hidden in. It's not really a bar either.
It's like a hole in the wall bar or a hole in the wall spot to drink.
so when it
drugs?
was illegal, so during Prohibition, when it was illegal to drink, a speakeasy was like an illegal bar, but it was secret. So like you go into this place and it looks like a store or a theater or whatever, and then you go in the back and there's a big bar in the back where people could sit and get drinks. And now it would be similar to like an after hour spot,
After okay, yeah,
something like that. But then it was no liquor was legal, so any place had to be like that. So yeah, speakeasy was like a illegal bar.
okay.
But over in Australia, they call them sly grogs. And that's the stuff when I'm doing research. Now I have to do extra research because I find out, okay, he worked at a sly grog. Cool. Now I got to start looking that bullshit up and find out what is a sly grog.
Right. Yeah, now you got to look up different terminologies and stuff.
Well, because what you don't want to do is butcher other countries' stuff, because they don't really like that. So
He's a Sydney dude.
Yeah.
He knows that. Sly Grog Shopping Kings cross in Sydney.
Sly Grog Shop Kings cross in Sydney. Okay, that's cool, man. That's good. And then so they just use different terminologies for the way that they're doing. So is there is there a mob in every
Wookie?
country?
Yeah, there
Right?
is, because it's crime. So crime is a vacuum. So we call it the mob because that's what we know it as, because during Prohibition, the Italian mafia or the mob is what took a foothold. But every country, just like we always say, every place has a ghetto. You know what I mean? Well, every place has organized crime. So there's no utopia where everything's perfect. So it doesn't matter if you're in Australia, America. Um, there's a big family, the Rizzuto family, that's out of Quebec, Montreal. Sometimes they're known as the Sixth Family. It doesn't matter where you go. There's crime there, and then
Al
somebody has
Capone's
to
mom.
manipulate it.
Al Capone's mom's so old they used to run wagons on her.
Dude, you were
Wagons.
Josh pulled it up and started giggling, and I read it, and I was like, dude, I need to fucking listen, dude. This is bullshit. Because that was funny. That was a good joke.
Gear
Roz.
says Chow Hayes was a gangster in the 60s.
Okay. And I seen you go all the way to the 1700s. Is there even earlier criminals that you?
Since humans have been alive, there is crime.
No, I know that, but I'm talking like, your show went before the 1700s?
So I have some plans to go back even further, and because I like to do that, I like to throw curveballs. The problem is the furthest back we've gone was like 1790s. It was a female pirate named Rachel Wall, and it's
I
one of
think that's
my
the one-
favorite episodes.
I think that's the one I was in the 1700s, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
yeah.
And it's one of my favorite episodes. Wasn't very popular with the listeners. Like, our listeners listen to all of them, but a lot of these episodes, like if you cover a mobster, it gets a whole lot of listens because people that don't even listen to the show will tune in for that one episode.
Right, because they know
So,
the mobster.
right. Because of the name recognition. So it's evergreen material or whatever.
Mhm.
So I still have some that are a little bit older. The problem with the older ones is the information gets iffier. You know what I mean?
Less articles about it, less things.
Exactly. Like, we're talking about a time frame where very little people even read or wrote or whatever. So there's not a lot of information, and a lot of the information is inaccurate. So when you start getting too old, you get people where, some of these historians commit their whole life to covering just this one person. And it makes it really tough to dig in to do kind of that kind of research. But I like doing those things, so I'm gonna continue to throw in these old guys. I got like a con artist on deck. Like, so these, when you say, am I gonna run out of guys? These are all stuff that I've already planned out, and I'm just gonna figure out where to fit them in. I got a con artist from the 1600s that I'm gonna do at some point.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I want to do more pirates, stuff like that. So there's definitely old guys. And to be honest, a lot of these guys, maybe not the 1700s, but back into the 1800s, you can see a straight line of how these guys affect what the modern criminology is.
Right, and what I was gonna say is like a 1600s con man is not a 2022 con man.
Correct,
They
because the 2022 con man's just doing it online.
Yes, and this dude was sly tongued. Like the con mans nowadays don't even talk to nobody. They just sit on their computer and
They talk and they say, "Hello, how are you?" And then they say, Just give me your ID and your passwords, and I will give you $30."
yeah, but they're just sitting
And
there.
then you'll do it, and then they'll take over your name, and then they get all your friends to do the same thing.
That's what they try, dude. That's what they try.
Biggest criminal right now is Prince Andrew, Gear says.
How recent have you went with criminals?
Pretty recent. So I would say one of our most recent. I mean, we've covered a couple guys that are still alive that are, doing time in prison right now. So we've had guys that have been active as of till recently. So one of the guys, I'm drawing a blank on his name right off the bat, but he was known as Back Guy, which it means white devil, but he was actually the only white guy to ever join, like, work with the triad organizations.
Okay.
John Willis was his name.
Okay, John.
Another one, and you guys are kind of into MMA, right?
Oh yeah.
We covered a guy, Lee Murray, who I don't know if you ever heard of Lee Murray.
No.
but he's from England. He was a career criminal, but he was also a badass. So he started fighting MMA. Um, he's got he's still alive. He's in prison right now, but he's he made it to the UFC. You know, he won a UFC fight. He fought Anderson Silva to a decision. He was like a legit badass in MMA, but he was also a career criminal. He had the largest cash robbery in the history of England.
What?
Yeah.
And he had a whole nother life training to fight and everything.
Talking about robberies, one of my favorite robbery stories is those dudes that had the armor on. They come up there with the old school fucking armor from head to toe, and it took the whole SWAT team to take them down.
Yeah, that was the Hollywood shootout robbery.
That was like, holy shit.
They didn't have no guns. They had
they had guns,
Oh.
but they were armed and they were shielded like Fortnite. You know, you could shoot them with everything except for a rocket launcher and they'd live.
Didn't the one kid do that? Like armor up and go shoot people? Like put armor on?
There's a few people that have.
Dude. Like
a couple crazy things about that Hollywood robbery is for one, they were so outgunned that the police had to go into local gun stores and be like, hey, give us an AK or something, because we're just out here with 9s and shotguns and we're getting fucked up. So they had to go into like local gun stores to grab some guns to borrow.
How many fucking
for hours?
Was it?
There's 2.
There was 2 guys. What the fuck did they have, dude?
They had guns? That's why the police have to have better guns than the public now, is because of that incident.
Yeah, and those guys had got busted with all that stuff like a week before that, but technically they hadn't committed a crime, and they got released with all their stuff. So all the body armor and all the guns and all the bullets, they got busted with it and ended up getting released because they didn't have anything to convict them on.
Oh,
and then they robbed a bank and just tore up the LA police department.
Did they kill a lot of police?
I don't know the death toll on the police, but I know they died.
Yeah, they died. It was a crazy shootout, though, for sure.
Hours.
Had medieval armor on.
Well, it seemed that way. It wasn't medieval armor.
It was body armor.
It was like helmets and fucking all the way down to their feet. They had
SWAT
armor.
Team suits.
No,
basically.
like metal. Like they were shielded with it. That's why I call it old school armor. It was metal. It was sheet metals, not sheet metal, but it wasn't just your police armor. It was metal. It was real armor, like you would armor a car with or something.
Oh my God. That's kind of, and they were outgunned. So these dudes,
not the guys weren't outgunned.
No,
the police were.
Police. That's
machine guns.
And then how long ago was this?
In the 90s?
Yeah, I'd say like late 90s.
Okay.
You could still, there's live footage, so you could see actual live footage of the shootout, like the guys like standing behind a car.
It was on the news. It was live on the news. Yeah.
They were just,
you know how 9/11 was live on the news? There's the same thing. They would put it live on the news.
You seen it?
I remember seeing footage. I don't remember details.
Do you remember seeing it?
Not at the time. I didn't catch it live, but after it happened. So I wasn't watching it live, but it was at that time the biggest news out. So I caught a lot of the footage, and you can still see it on you can find footage anywhere, YouTube or whatever.
And what's it called? The what shootout?
Hollywood
shootout.
Yeah, if you just put that in there, it'll come up. Hollywood bank robber shootout.
No.
See, and we covered typically the opposite side. We covered a guy named Blind Bob, who couldn't see, was blind, and he robbed banks just strolling up in there with a note. It said, "Give me all your shit," and they would hand it over, and he would just bounce out, and then have a cab waiting for him because he couldn't drive because he was blind.
Holy shit!
Yeah, just go straight to the airport.
How did he get away blind? That's just. And how did he get caught then?
So he eventually got caught because he threw off his pattern. So he had a routine down that was perfect. And then one time he stopped to get a new piece of luggage to put his stuff in. And that's actually how he ended up getting caught, by making an extra stop. So he had a regular routine that he followed.
Oh, and then he made that extra stop, and then that's what got him screwed over.
Yeah.
And he was blind. That's yeah. So that's one of the craziest. Is there any more that are crazier than that? Like criminals that are like crazy
Uh,
story.
I mean, a lot of the stuff's crazy different ways. Off the top of my head, I guess the blind bank robber is pretty hard to top, but um, uh, there is Killer Petey was a Brazilian serial killer that he showed up, kind of went like Tombstone, showed up at a wedding and shot up the whole wedding and shit.
Tombstone's one of my favorite movies. Back in all the way from being a kid, that was one of my favorite
I never watched it.
stories.
I never watched it. Was it based on a real story or something?
Wide Earp and
Yeah, the shootout at the OK Corral. You've
Yep.
heard of that, right?
I heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
that's
really
Tombstone.
like real life. It's a super boring movie, but it's so packed full of knowledge, and there are some cool scenes in there. But I fall asleep nowadays when I watch it.
So
It's
like,
possibly Val Kilmer's best movie ever.
I agree.
really? Bullshit. No, but for like a history buff like you love that movie because it has all the information and stuff like that in it. Okay.
Yeah, it's a great movie.
Is that so? The one teacher turned you on to the history, and then that you're a
Yeah.
history teacher right now.
Rosin says his grandpa died in prison. I believe he said they called him the handsome bandit. Got caught robbing banks.
That's cool.
Hmm.
So, are you a history teacher
I'm
now?
your Huckleberry.
No, so I went to school to be a history teacher, and I made the mistake that a lot of kids make is I decided to chase my passion or to chase money instead of chasing my passion. So I
Oh,
went
when
to
you
school
got
to
to
be a
college.
history teacher. And while I was there, I decided, there's no money in teaching. I switched to business. So, now I'm in sales and I'm not going to complain. It's a good living. I put food on the table and I earn a good living. But um, most kids, you don't grow up and say, one day I'm going to grow up and be a salesman. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Right.
So it is what it is. It's a good job. Like, I'm not going to complain about it, but I say, and that's a mistake I try to preach to my kids not to do, is I decided at some point I'm more focused on what's going to make the most money than what I want to actually do. But
Right.
that might have led me to the podcast, honestly, because I've always had that itch to kind of tell these stories.
Yeah, but you're still doing it. Yeah, in a way, you're teaching history, but in your own way, which is even it's cooler because you like it even more. You're
Right.
just chilling, hanging out with your buds.
Now I'm teaching drunk history.
Yeah, basically, that's what you're doing. Drinking these drinking these chocolate daiquiris about to talk about criminals.
Mhm.
That's a super bad crime. you know uh we're gonna plug you in right now, and then I got one more question for you before we get off here.
Okay.
Yeah, so plug everything you do in.
How do we
can
find you?
somehow-
How do we listen to the podcast? All that.
So we're available on all the major platforms: Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, you name it. If you can get podcasts on it, we're on there. You can follow us on social media. We're at Bad Guy Podcast on both TikTok and Instagram. We got the Facebook. Say hello to the bad guy. But if anybody wanted to follow us, we could definitely use some subscribers on our YouTube. So we just started that up. We were late to the game. We built it all around the podcast itself, and now we're trying to build up our YouTube. We just started putting stuff out there. So if you go to the YouTube, say hello to the Bad Guy Podcast on YouTube, I definitely appreciate that. And we got a website too, badguypodcast.com. So the show is called Say Hello to the Bad Guy. That's kind of like our government name, I guess.
I like that name because the way you're saying say hello to the bad guy, you're getting to know this guy like in every situation. You're not just knowing about the criminal history. You're also like, dude, here's a fun fact
And of
about
course,
his personal life.
it's a play on say hello to the bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's where I kind of came up with the scheme, like the idea. I was thinking of the gangster thing, and I was trying to work the details. But yeah, it was in Scarface. You got the say hello to my little friend, and then you end it with say goodnight to the bad guy. It's the last time you see a bad guy with this, and I kind of thought we could mix those two together to exactly like you said. We're trying to introduce people to this guy's life story. So
Yes, and I think that's cool. That's a cool way because it's interesting. I got one more question for you.
Okay.
What? Last thing to say to the world. What are you saying?
Last thing to say to the world?
If you had one last thing to say to the world, what would it be?
Did I fuck that up, dude?
Every time you fuck it up.
What are you asking, dude?
I would say I just said it earlier, a minute ago. Chase your passion. Don't chase money.
Yeah, chase what you're gonna love to do, because look at, you're still gonna end up doing it while you're doing your sales job. You're gonna go home and do your history job.
Hey, I want to say I see this Rosin Smoke. He's talking about the handsome bandit, the gentleman bandit. He might be talking about Marion Hedgepath, who is a guy that we did cover.
The gentleman bandit.
Yeah, it's Gentleman Bandit.
Dude.
But all right.
Well, and I got one more thing to say before we end it. Call this guy Bad Guy Lock, because he said how your brain jerk T. I want to be Bad Guy Lock. That's how I know you as Bad Guy. So
Yeah.
I'm definitely gonna put a lock on it. You know what I'm saying?
Hey, I'll take it, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So call him Bad Guy Lock forever now.
Hey, the best nicknames you don't make up by yourself. They just come
Right.
out however. So
all right, guys. That's it for episode 98, man. Thank you for coming on. It was good meeting you. It's glad to know that you're my family secretly. You guys have a great night. Thank you for coming up, and I hope to see what you got in the future, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm a big fan. I appreciate you guys having me on.
All right, thank man. Have a good night.
Brought to you by Brain Jerk. Fuck yeah.
I'm with my people, man. I'm with the gang. My heart hurt. I can't help but sing.